The Kaleidoscope Mind. The rain wasn't just falling, it was etching the city in silver, a relentless, whispering downpour that turned the neon signs on Delaney Street into bleeding watercolors. Elara Vance watched it from the cramped, second-hand warmth of her studio apartment, the steam from a mug of chamomile tea fogging the glass. The city below, Aethelgard, was a creature of concrete and anxiety, and tonight it seemed to be sweating out its collective dread. She traced a finger through the condensation, a meaningless spiral, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in the echo of a word she'd heard 3 times that day. Kaleidoscope, asterisk. It had started at the used bookstore where she worked, the Obscura Annex. A man, gaunt and smelling of old paper and ozone, had purchased a crumbling volume on optical illusions. As she handed him his change, he'd looked not at her, but through her, his eyes pale and unfocused. "The pattern is breaking," he'd murmured. "Can you see the kaleidoscope?" Before she could answer, he was gone, leaving behind the scent of a coming storm. The second time was on the staticky radio in her ancient car. Tuning through the frequencies to escape the inane chatter of a talk show, she'd caught a sliver of a voice, deep and resonant, speaking as if from a great distance. "And the mind, you see, is not a single lens but a kaleidoscope. A twist of perception, and a new reality falls into place." Then it was swallowed by the hiss of empty air. The third time was an hour ago, scrawled in the margin of a library book she'd accidentally brought home, a dense text on Jungian archetypes. Next to a passage about synchronicity, in a handwriting that was not her own, was the word, underlined twice, kaleidoscope. 3 times. For Elara, a woman whose life was a quiet study in the spaces between things, this was not coincidence. It was a signal. A pull on a thread she had always sensed but never dared to tug. Her life was a series of near misses and intuitive hunches, knowing the phone would ring seconds before it did, dreaming of a long-lost friend only to receive a letter from them the next morning. She'd spent years trying to ignore these flickers, to bury them under the comforting weight of mundane routine. But this was different. This felt like an invitation. Or a summons. With a restlessness that the tea could not soothe, she pulled on her worn trench coat, its shoulders darkening immediately in the damp air as she stepped out. The city at night in the rain was a different entity. The sounds were muffled, the light fractured. Her destination was a place she hadn't thought of in years, the Silent Monologue, a tiny, subterranean bar tucked away in a cobblestone alley that time had forgotten. It was a haven for those who didn't quite fit, for chess players and poets, for insomniacs and seekers. It was also where she'd once met a man who spoke of the world in a way that made her pulse quicken with a terrifying recognition. The bar was exactly as she remembered it, low-ceilinged, smelling of damp earth, polished wood, and the faint, sweet tang of absinthe. The only light came from flickering candle sconces and a single, low-wattage bulb behind the bar, casting the patrons in deep, shifting shadows. She took a stool in the corner, the cold seeping from the stone wall through her coat. The bartender, a large, silent man named Bruno, nodded once in recognition and brought her a glass of red wine without her asking. She was halfway through the wine, the warmth spreading through her chest, when the door opened, admitting a gust of wind and rain. A figure stood silhouetted against the gloom, tall and lean, wearing a long, dark coat that shed water like a seal's skin. He moved with an unnerving grace, not walking so much as flowing to the stool next to her. It was him. Julian Thorne. He hadn't aged a day. His hair was still the same shock of silver against black, his face a landscape of sharp angles and quiet intelligence. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, settled on her, and a small smile touched his lips. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the marrow of her bones. "The pattern recognizer. I wondered when you'd start to see the pieces." Her breath caught. Julian. The word, kaleidoscope. "A key," he said, accepting a glass of amber liquid from Bruno. "Or a symptom. Depends on your perspective. Some people hear a word repeated and dismiss it as chance. Others understand it as a nudge from the subconscious, a signal from the deeper mind that something is aligning. You've always been one of the others, Elara. You've just been afraid to admit it." He told her a story then, his voice weaving a spell in the dim light. He spoke of the noosphere, a term coined by a philosopher, a sphere of human thought that enveloped the earth. Not a physical place, but a realm of consciousness, where ideas, fears, myths, and memories swirled in a vast, invisible ocean. Most people were islands in this ocean, unaware of the tides. But a few were sensitive. They could feel the currents. They could hear the whispers. They experienced the spillover as synchronicity, as déjà vu, as prophetic dreams. "What you're experiencing," Julian said, leaning closer, his gaze intense, "is a fracture. A crack in the consensus reality that most people agree upon. Something is happening in the noosphere, a disturbance. A powerful, focused thought form is trying to break through, and it's using sensitive individuals like you as its conduit. It's casting reflections, like a kaleidoscope. And it's drawn to your light." Elara felt a cold dread, but it was intertwined with a thrilling, undeniable excitement. This was the language she had been waiting her whole life to hear. What kind of thought form? "A fear," Julian said simply. "An ancient one. The Athenians called it phobos. It's not a monster under the bed, Elara. It's the essence of dread itself, the archetypal shadow of panic that feeds on human anxiety. And someone, or something, is amplifying it, focusing it like a lens. The city's unease, the rising paranoia, the nightmares people dismiss in the morning, it's all fuel." He placed a cold, smooth object in her hand. It was a shard of obsidian, polished to a mirror finish. "Look not at the surface," he instructed. "Look through it. Let your focus soften." Hesitantly, Elara raised the shard. At first, she saw only the distorted reflection of the bar, the candle flame stretching into jagged lines. But as she relaxed her eyes, as Julian had said, the image shifted. The reflections didn't just show the room, they showed the people within it, but not as they appeared. Over each person hovered a faint, shimmering aura of color and shape, a tangled knot of anxious orange above a man nursing his beer, a brittle, cage-like structure of blue around a woman reading alone. These were their fears, their hidden anxieties, made visible. The very air in the bar was thick with a gray, swirling mist of collective worry. She lowered the shard, her hand trembling. "I see it. You've always seen it, Julian said softly. You just didn't have a name for it. The kaleidoscope isn't an object, Elara. It's your own perception. Your mind is the instrument. The shard is just a tool to help you consciously access what your subconscious already knows. Their conversation was interrupted by a man stumbling into the bar. He was drenched, wild-eyed, his clothes disheveled. It was the same man from the bookstore. He scanned the room frantically, his gaze landing on Elara and Julian. A look of pure terror contorted his features. "They're in the mirrors," he gasped, clutching the edge of the bar for support. "The patterns, they're alive. They're turning. Don't let them see you looking." Before anyone could react, he let out a choked cry and fled back out into the rain. A heavy silence fell over the bar. Julian's expression was grim. "He's a sensitive. The fracture is widening. It's beginning to consume them." He stood up, throwing a few bills on the bar. "The source is close. It's anchored somewhere in the city, a place where fear has pooled for generations. An old place. We need to find it." The rain had intensified into a torrential downpour as they walked through the deserted streets. Julian led the way, his steps sure and silent. Elara followed, the obsidian shard clutched tightly in her pocket, its coldness a grounding force against the surreal tide washing over her. The cityscape had transformed. Through the shard, quick, stolen glances revealed a nightmare panorama. The towering buildings weren't just structures of steel and glass, they were encrusted with the psychic residue of a million anxieties, ghostly faces pressed against the windows, tendrils of despair snaking up the walls. Shadows didn't just fall, they moved with a liquid, predatory intent. The very air hummed with a low-frequency dread that set her teeth on edge. "Don't fight it," Julian murmured, his voice a steady anchor in the maelstrom. "Observe it. Fear gains its power from resistance. Acknowledge its presence, but do not let it become your reality. Remember, you are the lens. You control the focus." They arrived at the iron gates of Blackwood Cemetery, an ancient burial ground that sprawled over a hill overlooking the city. The gates were locked with a heavy chain, but Julian simply placed a hand on the old metal. There was a soft click, and the chain fell away, rusted through as if by a century of decay in an instant. "The rules of consensus reality are flexible here," he explained. Inside, the cemetery was a world unto itself. The rain fell harder here, drumming a frantic rhythm on the ancient headstones and mausoleums. The wind whistled through the bare branches of weeping willows, sounding like distant, mournful voices. Julian led her to the oldest section, where the graves were sunken and the inscriptions worn smooth by time. In the center stood a massive, black-domed mausoleum, the family tomb of the Blackwoods, the city's long-dead founding family. The air around it was thick and cold, a pocket of deep winter in the heart of the storm. "This is the anchor point," Julian said, his face pale in the intermittent flashes of lightning. "A place of immense grief and tragedy. The Blackwoods, their history is a tapestry of madness, suicide, and unspeakable secrets. The energy here is a perfect conductor." As they approached the heavy stone door of the mausoleum, Elara felt a wave of nausea and vertigo. The kaleidoscopic effect was overwhelming without the shard. The world seemed to be fracturing around her, reality splitting into 1,000 shimmering, terrifying shards. She saw flashes of things that couldn't be real, a child weeping over a fresh grave, a woman in a Victorian dress throwing herself from a high window, a man clawing at the earth, buried alive. The collective, historical fear of this place was pouring into her. "I can't," she gasped, sinking to her knees on the wet grass. "It's too much. It's eating me." Julian knelt beside her, his hands on her shoulders. His touch was surprisingly warm. "Elara, listen to me. This is the test. The fear is not out here. It's in you. It's a part of the human experience, a part of your mind. You have been running from the shadows inside you your whole life. But a shadow cannot exist without light. Your fear is not your enemy. It is a compass. It points to what you value, what you need to protect. Your strength is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important." He looked into her eyes, and in that moment, she saw not a mysterious teacher, but a man who had fought this same battle, who carried his own profound scars. "The source you're looking for isn't in some distant heaven, Elara. It's right here." He touched a finger to her temple, then to her chest, over her heart. "It is the core of you that chooses to look, to see, to understand, even when it is terrifying. That is the ultimate power. Now, you must go in alone. I cannot follow. This is your labyrinth." With a final, steadying breath, Elara pushed against the cold stone door. It swung inward with a groan, revealing not a dusty tomb, but an impossible space. The inside of the mausoleum was vast, an endless, dark corridor lined with mirrors. But these were not normal mirrors. They were the facets of the kaleidoscope. In each one, a different version of her reality played out. In one, she saw herself as a successful, celebrated artist, but her eyes were hollow with a different kind of fear, the terror of being exposed as a fraud. In another, she was old and alone, surrounded by cats and regrets. In a third, she had never left her apartment, paralyzed by agoraphobia. Each reflection was a prison of a potential life, built upon a foundation of a specific fear. And at the end of the corridor stood a figure. It was her own shadow, cast not by any light source, but seeming to generate its own darkness. It was the Phobos, the archetype of dread, and it had worn her face. It was every anxiety she had ever entertained, every doubt that had ever kept her awake at night, given form and voice. Why continue? The shadow Elara whispered, its voice a chorus of her own insecurities. Look at all the ways you can fail. Look at all the pain that awaits. It is safer to stop. To close the kaleidoscope. To accept the quiet despair. It is the sensible choice. The weight of the visions was crushing. The logic of fear was seductive in its simplicity. To give up, to surrender, promised an end to the struggle. Elara felt her resolve crumbling. She wanted to close her eyes, to make it all stop. But then she remembered Julian's words. Your strength is the decision that something else is more important. She thought of the fleeting moments of connection she'd felt in the bar, the beauty of the rain on the windowpane, the quiet joy of a good book, the burning, insatiable curiosity that had led her here, into the heart of her own nightmare. That curiosity, that love for the mystery of existence, was more important than the fear. She did not try to fight the shadow. She did not scream or deny it. Instead, she took a step forward. Then another. She walked towards her own monstrous reflection. "I see you," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "And I am not you." She reached out, not to strike, but to touch the surface of the final mirror. As her fingers made contact, the glass did not break. It softened, like the surface of a still pond. The terrifying image rippled and dissolved. The endless corridor of mirrors collapsed in on itself, the shards flying towards her not as weapons, but as points of light, flowing into her, through her. In that moment, there was no separation between her and the fear. She absorbed it. She acknowledged its existence, its power, and in doing so, she reclaimed that power as her own. The kaleidoscope wasn't shattering, it was turning, and with that turn, a new, breathtaking pattern fell into place. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. It was a color in the vast, magnificent tapestry of her consciousness, a dark thread that gave depth and contrast to the brighter hues of courage, love, and wonder. The mausoleum was just a mausoleum again, a small, dusty chamber with stone sarcophagi. The storm outside had quieted to a gentle patter. Dawn was breaking, a faint gray light filtering through the open door. Julian was waiting for her outside. He said nothing, simply looked at her with an expression of deep knowing. She was different. She felt integrated, whole. The world, seen through her own eyes without any shard, was sharper, more vivid, more real. The rain smelled cleaner. The light of the rising sun hitting the wet gravestones was unbearably beautiful. "You understand now," he said. Elara nodded. The source was never hidden. It was just waiting for me to stop looking for it outside of myself. They walked out of the cemetery as the city began to stir. The world was the same, yet utterly transformed. For Elara, every face on the street now held a story, a hidden universe of fear and strength. She could feel the subtle currents of the noosphere not as a threatening chaos, but as a symphony of human experience. She was a part of it, and it was a part of her. Weeks later, the rain had returned, but it was a softer, gentler rain. Elara was back in her apartment, but she had pushed her desk to the window. She was writing, not in a journal of anxieties, but a story. A story about patterns, and keys, and the hidden strength that lies in the heart of darkness. The word kaleidoscope was now a friend, a reminder of the beautiful, ever-shifting patterns of a life fully lived. She looked out at the city, at the countless lights twinkling in the twilight, each one a consciousness, a world. And she knew, with a certainty that felt as solid as the earth beneath her feet, that the greatest mystery, the most profound adventure, was not out there in the shadows, but right here, in the endless, luminous landscape of the human mind. The investigation was far from over. It had only just begun. And for the first time, she was not afraid of what she would find. If you found yourself listening not just to Elara's story, but through it, if you've ever felt the pull of a coincidence too perfect to be chance, or sensed a pattern lurking just beneath the surface of the everyday, then you are already part of this mystery. The signal is weak, and the static of the world is loud. But your subscription helps to amplify the frequency. It tells the algorithm, and us, that you're out there, listening. That you sense there's more to the story. So, if you wish to continue the investigation, click subscribe. And if this reflection of reality resonated with you, leave a like. It's a beacon for other seekers. But most importantly, we want to know what you saw in the mirrors. What patterns have you noticed in your own life? The comments section is a logbook of anomalies, a map of synchronicities. Share yours. Until the next signal fades in from the static, stay curious.